Hello everyone, officially, and welcome to our online lunch event brought to you by Matchboard in partnership with BPESA, South Africa's Industry Association for Globally Traded Services. This event is entitled How COVID-19 Has Shaken Up Location Strategy and Risk Mitigation for Offshore Outsourcing, and will run for about an hour and a quarter. During this time, we hope to ignite your interest around the future of global service delivery, and specifically why South Africa ranked in the top 3 offshore destinations 3 years in a row now should be high on your list for consideration. We'll kick off with a keynote from Everest Group, followed by an industry panel discussion. And to conclude, we'll have time for audience Q&A. So think of your questions as we go along and feel free to enter them in the chat bar. Also, very important for this event, we'll be giving away a bottle of champagne to the person from the audience who asked the best, most interesting question during Q&A, as judged by our esteemed panel at BPESA. So let the questions flow with the champagne. The champagne is actually in recognition of the fact that this is the 4th and sadly final event in our mini-series this year, throwing a spotlight on South Africa as an outsourcing destination for services ranging from contact centers and collections through to finance and accounting and even software development. As most of you know, I'm Sharon Melamed, Managing Director of Matchboard, and I'll introduce our first speaker shortly. But before I do that, just some quick housekeeping. We'll be recording this event, but please don't record it yourselves. Secondly, if you have internet issues, you can dial in with the passcode and phone number provided in the calendar invitation. And finally, could I just ask that while you're welcome to keep your videos on, and I encourage that, just stay on mute to prevent outside noise for the speaker, who I will now introduce. Our guest speaker is Karthik. Karthik leads the global sourcing practice at Everest Group, a global research and analyst firm specializing in global business services. He and his team of analysts have helped more than 100 tier 1 clients in optimizing their location, sourcing model, and offshoring strategies. Karthik is a recognized expert in this space and a renowned speaker at international conferences. So over to you, Karthik. You can unmute. Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, thanks Sharon, and to all of you in Australia. Pleasure to be speaking with you, and good afternoon. And for those joining from South Africa, I think I should say, good morning and not good night. But anyway, pleasure to be speaking with all of you. Let me give you a quick introduction about kind of what our firm does and what I do. So Everest Group is a boutique advisory and research firm. Exclusively focused on global services. So by global services, we basically mean how global companies leverage global delivery models, right, to optimize value for global services. And in global services, we cover the entire spectrum of technology, customer experience management, or what's called contact center, all other forms of business process services. Also, digital kind of work, right? Mobility, analytics, technology, and the entire spectrum. So just I've been with the firm for 15 years now. I'm a global partner with the firm. Had the pleasure of working across multiple global delivery locations. We've been associated with South Africa for a very long time, and hence sort of the context of this discussion. Before I go further, the background image I have is not where I actually am. I'm at home, but this is just an image to make other people feel good about where we are speaking from. And we've been doing a lot of work as an advisory and research firm in the past few months around what does COVID really mean for the future of global location strategies, right? So I just thought I'll focus my session, a brief presentation, on really 2 key questions. What does COVID mean what's the impact for the future of global location strategies? And secondly, in that context, how does South Africa fit in? Right? Just our independent analyst point of view. Right? Just to begin with, right, COVID has taught us multiple lessons that will have a profound impact on the future of service delivery. So it is very clear that COVID exposed the lack of BCP. By BCP, we mean business continuity planning. So much so that ensuring resiliency and ensuring sustainable service delivery has now become a C-suite priority for most companies around the world. The second piece that this has opened up is that many companies felt, oh, if we were more automated, if our processes were more simplified, then it would not only help in productivity and efficiency, it would also help achieve resiliency. So resiliency has brought in a new level of focus to using tech-enabled platforms, advanced automation, and also pose the question on how can we re-engineer processes better? Now, keep in mind, this is not a new thing. It has got accelerated due to COVID. The third point is comfort with dispersed working models, right? Be it around work from home, be it around working from any other remote location. So much so that there is an increasing recognition, and we've done a lot of work in this area, that work from home in some form or shape is likely to stay as business as usual even after COVID vaccines are in place, because companies have understood how work from home can actually integrate well with the global strategic model. Right? Rapid and radical cost takeout has become very important for enterprises as they look to manage the effects of a recession. Clearly, it is a challenge to grow the top line in many industry verticals. Therefore, how do you manage the cost takeout? Right? And also the emergence of alternative talent models, be it contingent workforce, be it crowdsourcing, the gig economy, will make global services a lot more interesting going forward. Now, I spoke about BCP and location delivery. Thought I'll share with you an interesting analysis that we've done. 3/4 of enterprises. What we mean by enterprises, we mean buyers of services, right? This could mean companies that are receiving services for themselves. As I said, services here means could be IT, call center, business processes, shared services, the entire spectrum. Nearly 3/4 of an enterprises operate a single location strategy, right? And this is interesting, despite how much global services has evolved. 3/4 of enterprises use only one location for captive and shared services delivery. And then if you then look at companies that have multiple locations, over 70% of them have more than 50% in their largest location. So what this really means is I may have 3 locations in my portfolio, right? Maybe a local location in Australia for shared services. I may have a location in India, a location in the Philippines, just as a hypothetical example. But the vast majority of that headcount is still concentrated in the largest center. Therefore, even though you may have multiple locations, it doesn't actually guarantee resiliency because of the way the work is being distributed across multiple locations. Now, what this means is that going forward, we expect enterprises to be thinking about location risk through a very strong lens of diversification. And as you look at the spectrum of diversification options, the first 2 are about having a single site. You could have a center in, say, the Philippines, just for example. You could have 2 sites in the same city. Then you start having multiple sites in the same country. Let's say multiple cities in India, multiple cities in the Philippines. Then you have multiple sites in the same region. And then option E that you see here is multiple sites across different countries. Now, option E provides the most risk diversification. Now, having said that, it doesn't make sense for companies to just disperse for the sake of risk diversification. Things around scale, efficiency, and productivity need to be thought through but we do expect companies to be thinking about, increasing risk diversification. Now, that may not necessarily mean having your own center. That's really where the role of, third-party outsourcers come into the picture. You could be thinking about crowdsourcing, different forms of model. But the bottom line is that multi-country location diversification has become a C-suite priority. Now, just based on some of the recent surveys that we did, which underscored a lot of the comments that I made, more than 88% of global enterprises that we survey, and this is about 500 of these companies, they've increased share of remote delivery. More than half are looking for more hubs. By more hubs, we mean having multiple global locations in that portfolio. Almost 2/3 are planning to expand their geographical presence beyond just their existing locations for service delivery. And equally, if not more important, is the trend towards companies being open to looking at, satellite small-scale centers. Now, they may not set it up themselves, but as I said, using a third party to fill in the gaps in their global location portfolio. So that's really, where we see, global location strategy is likely to move going forward. And, all options are on the table now, right? We see companies saying, okay, do I need to have more countries in the portfolio? At the same time, do I also need to widen the portfolio of services being delivered? So we're seeing, all kinds of things happening. And there is also an opposite school of thought that says, do I need to keep work, closer to my source geography because, that provides, more intimacy. But then, then you have the talent shortage issue that's also driving companies to think more about global locations. Now, in all this, where does South Africa fit in, right? So the way we see South Africa is, it provides an attractive value proposition for global companies and, specifically Australian companies. Let me talk about the key elements of the value proposition, the way we see it from an independent sort of, analyst standpoint. We start with the talent pool first, right? So it's a skilled and young English-speaking workforce. And having traveled to South Africa more than 15 times, I have sort of felt that myself, but I'm sure many global companies have experienced that in their delivery from South Africa. Cultural affinity, I think is a very important factor here. Also the fact that when you think about South Africa, it's not just one city. You've got multiple cities that provide options, and that's kind of the talent pool is bolstered by the availability of talent through impact sourcing as well. So English-speaking talent is a key strength for South Africa. Significant cost savings, and that is particularly relevant in the context of the COVID environment. Sophisticated infrastructure and enable environment. These are kind of table stakes as far as global companies that are looking to deliver work from any location. Availability of government support in the form of incentives, quality of life, which I'm sure you all would have heard about. I'd like to just touch upon two other themes, right? Strengthening ICT and digital capability. So we're seeing an emerging strength in South Africa around tech-enabled value addition. I spoke about the shift towards more automation, the shift towards more tech-enabled work in the context of COVID. South Africa is evolving capabilities in multiple aspects of digital, right? Specifically, if you take the contact center world, things around omni-channel customer experience, and also things around cybersecurity, data analytics. Yes, the scale may not be too large, but these are definitely emerging capabilities. And of course, strong foundation in contact centers, which is the largest industry in South Africa, but also we see that expanding to multiple other areas like legal, healthcare, learning management, etc. So we see that South Africa presents a strong alternative to India and Philippines. Right, may not have the kind of scale that an India and Philippines is offered. But then, you've got some advantages as well, as you think about it from a risk diversification standpoint. And of course, things around cultural affinity and, the skilled, the English-speaking workforce. Right? The last thing I would say is, how has COVID changed the landscape as far as South Africa is concerned? Um, uh, Definitely the resiliency that was demonstrated by the industry and the kind of government support that was provided, demonstrated the fact that the industry can cope with, unforeseen events like this, and also reassure the industry of and potential investors of the government support of the sector. Now, different countries as well, did try to do the same with their own countries. But the way the South African industry responded, was quite, as independent analysts, it was good to see the kind of business continuity plans that were put in place. And also just one other, factoid which may have been shared with you earlier. The South African industry has been growing at a much larger pace, much faster pace compared to the global services market. Right? Part of that is also due to the smaller base of the industry, but then the fact that it has continued to grow at a much faster rate in the global market is also testimony to the value proposition of the industry and the testimonials that it has demonstrated. Of course, there are challenges that companies like yours, considering South Africa, need to be aware of and need to mitigate them. But the fact that many global companies have set up in the last, I'd say, few years, and existing companies have continued to grow, presents an opportune time for South Africa. So if you look at the underlying value proposition and how COVID is likely to impact global location strategies, we feel that there is likely to be, a significant growth in South Africa over the next few years. With that, let me come to the end of the session. Wanted to thank you once again for this opportunity and look forward to the rest of the discussion.
Thank you so much, Karthik, for that fantastic presentation. I'm pretty sure there'll be some questions for the audience, and everyone can definitely type those into the chat room as soon as now. But I will read them out when it comes to the Q&A at the end of the panel discussion, which we're about to dive into now. So I want to introduce our panelists. Apart from Karthik, who you've just heard from, is Andy Searle, CEO of Bepessa in Cape Town today. Then we have Matt Conn, who is the Chief Revenue Officer at Merchants Group and formerly Director of Customer Service at iiNet. So, hey Matt. So to kick off our panel discussion, I just wanted to read out a few lines from an article written by McKinsey that came out last month, and it says, South Africa has been voted the second most attractive BPO location in the world 3 years in a row, based on its reputation as a reliable, cost-effective, and high-quality destination for outsourced business services. And the nation's standing as a key BPO player has been reinforced over the last 6 months. While lockdown measures to contain the coronavirus compromised business continuity around the world, South African contact centers were quick to migrate to remote working models and were able to remain operational with minimal disruption for clients. So I'm going to start with a question for Andy, a loaded question, which is with McKinsey citing South Africa as the second most attractive BPO location in the world, and the disruption to clients throughout COVID having been minimal, is now the time for Australian businesses to seize the opportunity to diversify outsourcing beyond the Philippines and India? Andy.
Sharon, thanks very much, and greetings to everyone on the call. Yes, it is, Sharon. South Africa has demonstrated the quality of its service delivery capabilities and its cost effectiveness for some time. As you highlighted, our second place ranking by Orion Strategic Advisory and their 2020 Front Office Omnibus survey bears testament to this. And so does that growth rate that Karthik referred to, 24% compounded annual growth for 4 successive years to 2018 and 35% in 2019 leading up to lockdown. The COVID experience also highlighted South Africa's operational resilience work from home capabilities. And if you think of how organizations like AWS have deployed a lot of work from home resources in South Africa during lockdown, it talks to that. And great skills, an abundance of skills across CX, F&A, software development, tech support, legal, and others, and growing maturity with omni-channel and tech-enabled platforms for automated work. If you add to this the cost benefit, then the value to an Australian company of offshoring work to South Africa is really significant right now, and it's going to remain so. And it was interesting listening to Karthik's discussion, you know, and the facts that more than, or from the research that shows that more than 74% of companies are looking at exporting work to tier 2 and tier 3 countries where we've typically been categorized. And it really is something that I think that is great to have the opportunity to share what that proposition is. So thank you. Yes, it is, Sharon.
Okay, so that's great. Karthik, would you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, let me also kind of, you know, pick on one question from one of the participants around, you know, I spoke about aggressive cost takeout and identification of redundant processes. What and when do you think this will flow into new and expanded outsourcing offshoring? So I think the question is around, you know, will cost takeout, what, when will this mean, you know, expanded outsourcing and offshoring? So it's a great question, right? You often have this issue about, you know, do you think about cost savings, you know, primarily by, let's say, you know, removing redundancy at the source itself and automation, or will it, you know, will you actually be doing more outsourcing and offshoring? In our recent research with companies, and we've seen this happen over many years, the two go hand in hand. Often when you outsource and offshore, that creates the additional fillip to automate as well, right? The reason is, you know, let's say you go through a third-party route and outsource to a vendor, you can create incentives in the offering, in the contract, for the vendor to drive outsourcing offshoring. On the other hand, if you set up your own, you know, shared services companies in any part of the world as an offshore location, as scale evolves in this location, that makes it easier to drive, automation. But as our recent survey indicated, and I shared with you, most companies are looking at a combination of both. Right? So I'm looking to outsource and offshore more. At the same time, also look to reduce redundancy. Now, coming back to what this means for South Africa, I would fully agree with with Andy's comments. Sincerely believe that this is the time for South Africa as companies look to first, look for more global delivery, looking for more hubs in their global delivery portfolio, and for those who've got a significant concentration in India and Philippines, South Africa provides a good risk diversification alternative.
Okay, thank you so much, Karthik. Matt, I'd like to ask you, obviously being with Merchants Group, big global BPO with a footprint not only in South Africa, but also the Philippines, and for that matter, Canada as well. Are you seeing amongst your client base any of this trend that Karthik's mentioned towards geo-diversification and clients not wanting to put all their offshore eggs in the one basket?
Yeah, look, absolutely. We have seen with some of our clients a need and a drive, and not just our clients, but the market in general, around risk diversification across multiple regions. What's interesting in the South African context, I guess, with this, is South Africa's had a value proposition that's been talked about, particularly in the Australian market, with some key companies having their services there. However, there's been some perceived barriers to why you would go. I think what the pandemic's done, and the performance of South Africa, it's actually started to eliminate some of those barriers and really clarify them for people. So specifically, if you talk to things like the stability of infrastructure, well, obviously, from a region comparison throughout the pandemic, South Africa has actually outperformed all regions, and certainly those more well known to the Australian market in terms of uptime and the ability to operate. In terms of government support, that was another barrier that often people would be concerned about. And again, the support from the government throughout the pandemic and keeping business open and the ability to service businesses from offshore locations was second to none in terms of that. And then lastly, the available talent. Karthik mentioned in his study there that the scale may not be the same as the Philippines or India. The reality is there are the same amount of talent entrants into the pool of BPO in South Africa as there is in the Philippines every year. The difference is you don't have the saturation. As a live example, we currently have over 200,000 people on our database, of which have been behavioural profile baselined and gone through that process. And so what the pandemic again showed is that, that need when the Philippines went down, when India went down, when the other locations were unable to obviously provide services, that ability to ramp in the hundreds very quickly, that ability to stand up quality work from home very quickly, that ability to operate offices when you have such restrictions in place, and obviously the government support that enabled us to simply stay open when all other regions shut down, really starts to eliminate those barriers. And I think the last one for Australia is certainly the time zone. And obviously IONET, going back to my previous life, one of the drivers was that follow the sun mentality. However, we quickly moved to a 24/7 operation. Again, the need for 24/7 in South Africa was increased through the pandemic because the regions that would normally provide the other coverage weren't available. And again, it was a seamless transition. And so all of those barriers you start to see have now kind of gone away. And, whilst the pandemic has certainly helped prove that, I think what it's actually done is said, well, the value proposition that's been there for some time probably reinforces that, it is still there, it is still available. And therefore, given companies are choosing to start to reconsider, the diversification of risk and their operational kind of model, it certainly is an enticing option, particularly for the Australian market.
Thanks very much, Matt. I'd like to come back to Andy. So there's a bit of a perception, I think, amongst Australians that South Africa's sort of a combo of first world and third world. And so in terms of infrastructure, and I mean things like telco and transport, can you share what it's like on the ground in South Africa for our audience?
South Africa boasts many great cities, Sharon. At least 6 cities have got great concentrations of global business service delivery centres, and that's Cape Town, East London, Cape Town down in the south, East London and Port Elizabeth on the east coast, KwaZulu-Natal and the city of Durban a little bit further up on the east coast, and then in the central part of the country you've got Johannesburg and Pretoria. They offer great residential and commercial accommodation, top universities in all of these cities and across the country, great colleges, great schools. There's an airline network that connects all the cities, road and rail infrastructure that not only services South Africa, but connects South Africa into continental Africa. It's only an 11-hour direct flight from Perth through to Johannesburg, and 14 hours and 15 minutes direct from Sydney through to Johannesburg. And from there you can connect to any one of those cities, Pretoria and Johannesburg, obviously just a very short drive from the airport in OR Tambo. And South Africa also offers great diversity in terms of where you want to live and the kind of lifestyle that you would have. The telecommunications infrastructure that you asked me to comment on, it's known as the best in the continent for good reason. It's got a network that's 99.9% digital. It's got the latest fixed line, wireless and satellite communication technologies. And we're connected to all our major trading destinations. We've got 8 undersea cable networks on our west coast. We've got 7 on our east coast that keep us connected. And South African network providers support more than 250,000 kilometers of fiber cable across South Africa and the continent. Government's really behind the drive to digital, and they've launched different initiatives to roll out broadband. We've got policies like South Africa Connect, with a vision for a seamless information infrastructure by 2030. We've got a focus on the transition to digital broadcasting. We've got the reassignment of spectrum for mobile broadband use, and ensuring last mile connectivity and the reduction of interconnect charges. So the infrastructure in South Africa is very robust, is very user-friendly and reliable. And I think it's proven that, particularly during lockdown and COVID.
Sorry, guys. Andy, you mentioned lifestyle being really good in South Africa, and Matt, you're obviously an Aussie, and you are a doting dad of 4 daughters, and you basically packed your bags with your family and moved from Sydney to Cape Town, understand. Can you comment on the safety and security and just generally the environment working in South Africa from the Australian perspective?
Yeah, look, I think it's a lot safer than having 4 daughters, to be fair. But look, in regards to South Africa, look, I've been working and living. I'm now back in Sydney, but have been working and living in South Africa for over 10 years now. Also, during the period with INEP, we would have sent well in excess of 200 individuals, both SMEs and agent support and various different people, to live at different times in South Africa and enjoy life. The one thing I can say is the hardest bit was actually getting them to come back home. Look, in terms of South Africa, perception and reality are 2 very different things. And it's no surprise that when we do take people to South Africa, that a lot of those concerns immediately disappear. Obviously I wouldn't be taking my family to live in South Africa without that level of comfort I had. I think, what most people see is the similarities to what we live, particularly from an Australian lifestyle perspective, are very close. The safety concerns, etc. I personally have not had any issues, nor have we had in terms of what we've brought over from people, clients, and otherwise. So overall, look, the lifestyle is fantastic. Perception is very different to reality in some areas of the media, if I'm being honest. And look, I encourage, if you have the opportunity to go there and look, have a look at it as a potential location for you, I think what you will find, actually I'm pretty sure what you will find in a very quick and short space of time, is that everything I've said in regards to the safety and the lifestyle and the similarities will certainly be very evident to all of you.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, so one thing in working with Bopesa personally that I've noticed is just how proactive the industry associations and government are vis-a-vis target markets like Australia. In fact, I would have to say South Africa is probably the most proactive overseas market that is engaging with an Australian audience. And Andy, it's often said that government support is crucial to the development and success of a BPO and an ITO industry. Could you comment a bit further on how the South African government supports the sector, and specifically what interventions they made during the pandemic to make sure everything ran smoothly?
Yes, Sharon, the South African government has supported the sector formally since 2005, when the sector was declared a priority sector in our economic development strategy. It supported it with incentives that are really attractive, with policy support, skills development support, so a range of areas of support. The South African government offers the Invest SA capability, which is a one-stop shop in terms of just helping operators set up in South Africa. There's a lot of aftercare support that goes with that, and it's just to make it a seamless experience. We've got foreign economic representatives working in the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition and all the source markets who are there to engage with operators, with clients, with our team, and they do so very effectively across the world. The sector is a priority sector for the South African government. It's received special attention and support during lockdown. And there's also, as you've talked about, there's a proactiveness about how South Africa is reaching out to the global markets, but that's also built on the strength of a very strong relationship between business and governments. And this relationship or partnership really demonstrated its value during lockdown. And what happened there was a lot of lobbying leading up to the lockdown between ourselves and our partners in government. And that led to the sector being designated a provider of essential services, and ensured business continuity to both domestic and international clients throughout that lockdown period. Now, that was very significant, and it was based on government's appreciation of the value of the sector as a provider of these services, and to not let down clients globally or domestically in their time of need. Our business played its role as well, and very proactively developed health and safety protocols that they implemented across the board, collaborated around designing these evolving practices that they implemented, and a lot of knowledge sharing. And they also demonstrated just the priority focus placed on their staff, deploying work from home before we went into tight lockdown, and ensuring that the well-being of their staff has been, absolutely paramount in their thinking and their daily execution, to the extent that the pandemic itself was really limited in terms of its spread in this sector, with very low infection rates. And we find now that things have settled into sort of 60% work on premise, 40% work on home model, which is looking more and more like our normal. Now, this overall performance of government and business and this collaboration has really ensured that clients and their customers were not let down or disrupted during the lockdown. And keeping in mind the brand implications of that, it's really a key strength of the South African proposition, is this relationship, understanding, and support of business and government.
Thanks, Andy. Karthik, you're obviously an advisor, trusted advisor to many tier 1 companies around the world who have offshore operations. What was your experience of South Africa versus the Philippines and India in terms of the ability to cope with the lockdown and ensure continuity of operations for clients?
Yeah, as I said, right, South Africa, did the industry and the government, and, different stakeholders did a great job of ensuring that the operations were running smoothly. But I think, we just need to think of this question a bit more broadly than just about what was experienced during the lockdown. And I kind of go back to the value proposition and how South Africa offers a different value proposition compared to the India and the Philippines and and other countries, right? Because the way we see this is each location has a unique role to play in the portfolio, right? They yes, you can say they're competing, but then they also have very distinctive strengths, and they therefore offer a unique role for companies in the global portfolio. That's really where I go back to the the quality of the English skills, the the cultural affinity, ability to provide 24/7, which is kind of what Matt spoke about, the emerging strengths in digital. That rounded value proposition is what I believe is unique for South Africa.
Okay, thanks, Karthik. And could I just ask you maybe to put the headphones, because you have been breaking up a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, but just while you're doing that, I'd like to ask Matt. Obviously, Merchants Group employs thousands of contact center agents and knowledge workers in South Africa. What percentage of the workforce specifically was operational through the different stages of COVID?
Yeah, look, we were very fortunate through COVID, as a result of planning and the way we run our estates in terms of the sites we have and also our work from home capability. We experienced less than 3% downtime and still do. So, from when the pandemic started to now. And obviously, when you compare that to, other providers or more importantly, other regions, what you see is simply put, we just remained open and there was very little impact for us. Our ability to trigger a lot of our contingency plans, our ability to put in place, some of the industry leading pieces that Andy talked about in terms of, how we protected our people, how we looked after our clients, and what we did there, was fantastic and something I'm exceptionally proud of. But as a result, we experienced very little downtime.
Thanks. 3% is actually amazing compared to the stats in some other countries. So congrats on that success story. That actually wraps up our panel discussion, everyone, but we're going to now have plenty of time. In fact, we've got half an hour for Q&A. And I can see the questions flowing through in the chat room, and also we'll give people an opportunity to turn on their camera, unmute, and ask questions as well. But I'm going to start reading out some of the questions which have been really good. And actually, I might throw the first one to Matt, which is a very interesting one given your background with IINet. And the question is, when setting up offshore, do you recommend having someone from your business leading at the offshore site? How do you recommend training is done? What sort of attrition do you see? Do you have a work from home option? That's like 5 questions in one.
Yeah.
So
sorry.
We're going to count each of those questions individually when we assess.
I am curious.
So Matt, do you want to take those one by one?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, let me work through it. Firstly, I'll talk a little bit to the IINet model because obviously it was a model that worked. We had over 1,200 people and still do. Well, they still do today. Over 1,200 people based in Cape Town in South Africa, servicing the Australian market. So it was a significant operations that built over time. However, in terms of the leadership, we didn't have on-site leadership simply because to lead and motivate people in a certain region, that local knowledge, that ability to obviously drive people is very key. Now, what we did do, however, is we did absolutely invest in providing different supports. We ran different programs with our subject matter experts in Australia, where they spent quite a bit of time at different stages over there, which we were able to mix, as a development program, as well as obviously a huge opportunity for those individuals. But at the end of the day, certainly provided that level of support. You got to remember that started 10 years ago, and the virtual ability now has certainly changed with that. So what we are seeing is clients are shifting that somewhat. But each situation is different. However, from a merchant's perspective, we have rarely seen any of our clients, actually we don't have any clients who have specific on-site support from their business. And that's just the model that seems to be there at the moment. Look, I think, when you start to look at what we can do now in terms of virtual, the transparency and obviously the way we run things in terms of aligning to cultures and being an extension of operations as opposed to a straight handoff kind of situation, makes that far more successful, at the moment. In regards to the next piece in terms of training, what normally would happen, and the way that we've done it again with IINet and the successful model we use, is we will do a train the trainer session. We will effectively build a training team, a bespoke training team that's dedicated to our client. And therefore, in a normal world, we would have sent them to the clients to actually participate, shadow, and invest in doing that right, simply because that's provided the best, from a sustainability point of view. Recently, during the pandemic, obviously we've done a lot of that virtually, and that's something that we've just simply had to do, but also has worked quite well. So there's a mixed model there. Third to that, we absolutely are open to and have done for different clients, is to bring their own trainers across when possible, to be able to obviously also sit in the classroom and back up the trainer training with that live support. So there's a number of different models, but ultimately it's going to come down to what works the best. I think the short answer, however, is we will absolutely adopt the training practices of our client. And make sure that we take what they have, add the best practice that we feel we can add in terms of value, and particularly from a regional focus, and ultimately the outcome should be a blended mix that provides a successful outcome there. I'm just trying to find the rest of the question. And look, last, the sort of attrition do you see? Look, it's an interesting one. I think what you'll find is most providers will probably give you attrition rates over the last 9 months, which have been exceptionally good, as you can clearly imagine in most locations. Look, it does differ, and it differs from region to region. The one thing from an IINet perspective, we used to run at 35% attrition in South Africa at times. And it depended, to be fair, it depended on the size of the operations too. When we were running probably between 500 and 800 seats or below out of South Africa, we actually perform far better than our Australian and New Zealand sites. And often, it wasn't unexpected to see, sub 2% a month in terms of attrition. So it is quite good. Again, there are a lot of factors, and I think most of you would know, being operational people or knowing operations inside out, that the other thing is how you measure attrition as well. I'm using the measures that we used in Australia, I guess, and that comparative point. But ultimately, it does come down to the same factors we see in Australia. What do you pay your people? What programs of support do you put in? What benefits do they have? What sites do you ask them to come and work in? And that's key, and I know it's a question later on, which will probably be covered, but all of that, it really contributes to it. And I think, fortunate for a provider like us, we've been around for 40 years. So it's fair to say we've made our mistakes and we've learned from it. And I think that goes for everyone. But at the end of the day, the factors that impact attrition are no different to what we see in Australia. And the performance as a result, if you address those factors the right way, are certainly, what you'd expect to see, if not better than we see here. And the last piece of the question, the work from home option, look, it's an interesting one. We'd actually approached this prior to the pandemic and call that either fortunate good luck or good management. I'm not sure which one. I'll probably take good luck at the moment. But the work from home option, we split it into two different things. And the way we explain it is a bit like a raft and a cruiser kind of situation. You need a raft in a storm where you're thrown out of the boat, and therefore sending someone home with a laptop and a headset, asking them to operate in a subpar environment where, the kids are in the background, people are walking past, is one way of doing it. We've taken a more sustainable approach. And the reason we did that is, IronNet, for instance, was globally recognised for its work from home. It had 15% of people working from home, and quite successfully, but there was a reason it was only 15%, and that was because it was very hard. It's very hard to do even when we owned our own network. So, we took a lot of lessons from that, and the model we've taken are two things. From a business continuity point of view, we absolutely have the raft solution. So laptops, headset, go home and answer. We have launched a program and an initiative called Akaya, which in Zulu means home. And basically what that is that's a bit like your BCP model on steroids. So for instance, it includes, we send people home what we call Akaya in a box, which is a flat pack desk, obviously the computer technology, fiber grade connectivity, different kind of security protocols, everything, the ergonomic chairs, all of those kind of things, so that people can actually set up the office in their home, which is important in South Africa, as it is in most other regions from a BPO. So that's how we're approaching it. To give you some figures, we set up nearly 3,000 work from home within 3 weeks at the pandemic. And that, is something that, again, we were able to do because we simply had it as part of our plans prior, and we were able to, obviously, through our reach from an IT point of view in South Africa, was able to get hold of the increased kind of, infrastructural technology that we needed.
Thanks, Matt.
No worries.
Yeah, thanks for addressing all those points so well, Matt. I'm going to read out another question, and this one I'll throw to Andy. Do you have, another question popped up on top of that. What would you say is the rough percentage of contact center versus back office work currently outsourced in South Africa? And is there a particular driver for this mix versus, say, other established locations like India?
Sharon, the percentage mix of voice-based work and back office work in our second quarter of the year as a snapshot was 95% to 5%. And I think just underpinning that fact is the essence of South Africa's proposition, which is it really is a English language voice-based proposition at its core. But having said that, and the value proposition that Karthik presented earlier, what's less known about South Africa's capabilities are for a lot of the other shared services, back office type work, but particularly when you get into the niche areas. And what we're starting to find now is a lot of growth and a percentage change of that work. I think this is also influenced by leading into lockdown. Our quarter two started in April. So it's April, May, June, just to give you that snapshot. and of course voice-based services, which couldn't take place in many other areas and were essential, were all running operational here. But that's just to give you a sense of it. And we see voice-based work remaining predominant across all subsegments of the sector, but a growing contribution in that of different forms of back office work.
Thank you, Andy. There's a very interesting question that's come through from Leslie around culture. I'll read it out. Having been an early adopter of the India BPO back in 2005 from the UK, one of the biggest challenges was culture and people understanding the nuances from country to country. The success of any of this is the ability to immerse the people in the culture and the environment of the organization/country. How do you manage that? Actually, Matt, would you be prepared to answer that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's a really good question, actually. The fact with South Africa is, and this actually goes to the UK, funnily enough as well, is that cultural affiliation is very strong between all of those countries. You know, what we do and what we did with INET. So for instance, you know, again, it comes down to our partners as well. So for instance, with INET, I had a very strict kind of directive where I wanted, you know, whether someone walked into an INET office in Perth or Melbourne or Auckland in New Zealand or Cape Town in South Africa, I wanted them to feel and live and breathe and kind of get that cultural, you know, feeling in terms of they felt as if they were just walking into an INET office. This isn't dissimilar to a lot of the leading providers in South Africa, which is fantastic, is that we spend a lot of time. So from a merchant's perspective, there's a couple of things we do. One is we build bespoke sites. So the design of the sites are absolutely done in conjunction with our partners. You know, if I give you a live example, the INET site, for instance, you know, the meeting rooms and meeting spaces will look and feel as if you're walking into the MCG or you're walking in, you know, over the Harbour Bridge and things like that. So we do a lot of cultural affiliation there. In terms of then, you know, what we do, most of the people that will work for different, you know, clients and partners of ours will feel as if they're actually employed by that partner. So from an INET perspective, again, you know, if you walk in to the INET site, you would not see the branding merchants anywhere. It would all be INET. You know, the people would have INET lanyards, everything they get is INET. So, you know, they naturally, truly believe they are employed by our partner, which helps to breed that cultural piece. And then simply the adoption of like-for-like programs, like R&R programs, training, you know, the way we upskill, the way we do different kind of management structures and cadence and things like that really starts to help with that. As I said, you know, I've had locations in all the major regions, including living in India for a period as well. So this is something that we see in all of these locations. I think the advantage that South Africa has is simply that their affiliation with the Australian culture and also the UK, but the Australian culture in this scenario is so strong. You know, when you look at the lifestyle, when you look at the look and feel of where they live, their upbringing, you know, obviously the English language, their schooling, you know, everything is very similar to the sport landscape. You know, so it is very similar there, and therefore we don't normally come across the regional culture piece, and therefore it allows you to just simply focus on how do you build the brand culture, which, you know, is something, if you're only focused on that, you know, can be quite successful, which is good.
Thank you, Matt. There's a good question here from Albina. And I'm going to throw it to Karthik. So the question is, you've noted the shift to tech-enabled value-add opportunities. It's great to hear growth in that space. How do you think the level of digital capabilities compares to the well-established BPO locations of India and the Philippines, particularly amongst tier 1 service providers?
Okay. No, it's a very good question. So as I said, right, digital capabilities is an emerging area of strength in South Africa. We see the digital capabilities in South Africa stronger in the contact centers / customer experience management space. So think of it as a digital evolution of the contact center, CXM, customer experience services. So things around, you know, omni-channel, those types of digital areas is where we see, you know, South Africa, you know, stronger. In other areas of digital, so for example, if you were to take, you know, cybersecurity, cloud, machine learning, yes, we see this as emerging strengths. As of now, the scale and breadth of these capabilities will be larger in India, especially compared to South Africa. But if you were to look at digital capabilities in the contact center space, which is kind of what even Andy mentioned, that is the largest industry in South Africa today. Those would be pretty strong in South Africa as well. Okay,
thanks, Karthik.
Yeah.
So another question here, which I sort of know the answer to, but I'm going to throw it to Andy. As the number of BPOs in South Africa grows, what is being done to ensure there's a suitable pool of talent for those who may be considering the move?
Great question. And I think there are a number of layers to that answer. So first of all, I think first and foremost, we've got an abundance of young people exiting the schooling system on an annual basis, just under 500,000. We've got various programs that are aimed to prepare them for the world of work where appropriate, and those programs are designed to expose them in particular to the export services nature of work that we do. In many cases, they'll progress first through some domestic campaigns and then get involved in the export campaigns. And just to give some context to that, we've got over 200,000 people working in the domestic market, and we have just over 67,000 people servicing the export market. So this is a well-established and mature domestic BPO environment with a lot of rich skills in it. And then we have national and regional skills development initiatives that are jointly run and funded by government and business, which complement what business is doing on its own. So these, for example, include integrated workplace learning programs where people are taken through an end-to-end learning pathway into their working role, and that includes training that precedes the work environment. Then they would go through their client-specific training and support, and that's usually over an extended period, which could be as long as 12 months, where they're getting that level of support. Now, those are also co-funded, as I mentioned, by government through our National Skills Fund and our Department of Higher Education and Training, and they're demand-led. We also have other initiatives across the country that focus on niche skills. So in some areas, you've got academies that are dedicated to, for example, the retail segment, to financial services segment. We've got new digital academies that have been set up, and these are starting to respond to some of the specific needs of these subsegments. And then at a broader level, we have a really big drive to raise the level of digital skills and workplace skills of the future through a range of sector-wide initiatives and skilling programs, including platform-based learning and various others. So it's quite a comprehensive, multifaceted approach to complement what business is doing on their own to respond to the skills requirements of the jobs in high demand.
Thanks, Andy. And I know also in the previous session that we ran, which was around IT outsourcing, we had an Australian case study talk about their experience of just being unable to find the tech talent in Australia and how easy it was to find really high quality people with IT and digital skills in South Africa. So it seems, the unemployment is higher in South Africa, but that's actually a great thing for the clients needing the services.
And Sharon, if I may add to that, you prompted me on something, if I may. I think it's also well worth noting for the participants on this call that the talent pool of South Africa is a huge strength as a resource and as an enabler of growth at scale, and also just across the different sub-segments and levels of complexity of work that's serviced from South Africa. Now, what South Africa is really focused on is creating opportunity for young people who've typically not been able to access these work opportunities easily. And we have, for quite some time now, been leaders in the practice of impact sourcing. And impact sourcing, if we were to dig into it, really involves taking young disadvantaged people, preparing them for the world of work, and then getting them seamlessly into the workplace and domestic or export jobs. And it forms a core component of our strategy for growth. and simply because it's unlocking a vast talent pool of highly empathetic, really connected young people into this world. So that's something that's a practice. It's actually embedded in our policy guidelines as well with government. And I think if you were to ask people like Matt and the many others who've been on this series, operators, to bear testaments to the quality of those skills, they would do so.
Thanks, Andy. The next question I'm throwing to Matt. I think it's a fantastic question. How are the vendors driving digital, and how are their incentives stacked up, I assume in contracts, to encourage them to reduce volumes? All the commercial models today, are they volume linked?
Yeah, no, they're not all volume linked. Firstly, the whole digital shift and the requirement to have very strong initiatives and a strong development in terms of the digital capability is a driver for all in South Africa. Clearly, if we're operating and relying simply on a volume-based business, it's probably a bit of a sunsetting industry, if I'm being honest. And therefore, the need to absolutely shift and start to really develop that digital capability has been around for several years, and so it's an active component of many. In terms of the commercial modelling, it's an interesting one, because one thing that we've been trying to do for quite some time at the moment is outcome-based modelling, and obviously incentives attached to the ability to really look at how you service your partners in terms of the outcome, including the reduction in efficiency that's associated with that. So, that is something that is available. We do have clients and partners that operate in various models, and some of them are even blended models, funnily enough. So the mix of that, and having that commercial ability or modelling ability already in place is very good. The development of the digital and what vendors are doing about it, one of the things that we've simply had to do, I think Karthik touched on this, and is clearly the value propositions in South Africa, and Andy just alluded to it, is the people. It absolutely is. When you look at the voice first back office and the talent pool we have, and the quality of the actual voice call or the voice interaction is so key. The focus for the vendors, and we aren't alone in this, is that how do you blend the digital and the human? How do you combine the two? How do you make sure that you are providing the efficiency benefits, whether that be in terms of automation or otherwise, to the task that should be, whilst really starting to provide excellence. And the one term that many of us use, including us, is how do we augment that interaction? We don't want to say that we want to replace, we want to augment it to make sure that interaction's right. But it is absolutely, it's a bit like a race to the moon, I think, across multiple regions. That drive to have that digital answer really embedded, and have that as somewhat of a differentiator is important to all of us. And I think long gone are the days where you rely on your partners or clients and just simply take on the initiatives that they're producing in terms of how they service their customer base. That has changed several years ago to we have to lead that conversation now, and we have to use our partners to be able to really provide those solutions. So yeah, it's quite strong.
Thanks, Matt. Jeff from Virgin Group has an interesting question. What are the top 3 to 4 countries offshoring work to South Africa, apart from Australia, obviously? Are there any specific verticals where South Africa has abundant capability and talent? Andy?
Well, the biggest countries sourcing to work from South Africa at the moment are the UK, Australia, and North America. So those are the 3 top countries. And we're experiencing, funny enough, growth in all 3 of those areas. But South Africa is also expanding to support parts of Asia, the rest of Africa, and other parts of Europe. But those are by far the 3 largest source markets for South Africa. There is a lot of the work that's been sourced from South Africa at the moment is in the telecommunications vertical, in the retail vertical, energy, financial services. And there's also been a lot in the travel and hospitality, but of course that was impacted during COVID, apart from emergency support, etc. The health industry and ed tech industry are growing quite quickly. And then, of course, in one of our sessions, we spoke about the lesser known yet really important work done in software development, outsourcing, and digital and RTO work. But yeah, there's a range, but those are the predominantly the key services being procured from South Africa. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Before I move to another question in the chat room, would anyone like to turn off their mute and ask a question directly of any of the speakers, Karthik, Andy, or Matt? Just turn off your mute if you have a question. I think everyone must have used the chat bar. Yep. Okay, so we'll just continue with the chat questions.
I'll go, Sharon.
Okay.
Question for the panel, and I don't know who's best placed to answer it, but from a cultural perspective, we've talked about the affinity, obviously, of South African culture, particularly with the Australian one. We know one of the kind of the positives, but the challenges in dealing with particularly Philippines and India is kind of that hesitance to raise concerns or kind of problems, which, complements very nicely, very much a customer-centric and sort of almost accommodating focus sometimes. What do you see is kind of the challenge within the South African cultural context when working with Australian organisations?
Andy, I'm happy to take that. If you look, I think
you go ahead, Matt.
It's a really good question, and I don't want to throw marketing talk out there, so apologies in advance. But there's a term that gets often used around the critical friend piece, and a lot of people want to strive to be that. Being that, however, in reality is harder than you think, particularly when you're dealing with a client or a partner and such. The one thing with South Africa, and there's been a lot of talk over previous years around the empathy and the problem-solving ability and everything to do, just that's inherent in South Africans, similar to what you see in Australians. I think the difference is there is less of the sorry kind of, outcome or messaging back to okay, let's make a plan. When you're in South Africa, if you haven't heard someone say, okay, we just need to make a plan, or let's make a plan, you're absolutely in the wrong spot. And I probably hear it, 20 times over a couple of days. And it's that mentality that actually has it, because, what they are very proud of is that ability to find a different solution there. And one of the things, I see often, and we saw it absolutely with INET, but I see it now, with the guys at the front line when they're dealing with some of our partners in Australia or the US and the UK. A lot of the feedback I get as an executive sponsor on accounts is, wow, your guys are so upfront. You guys are so open to actually challenging, but also want to be, involved in it. So, it's one of those things where everyone will tell you that, yes, we're going to be that critical friend. I think what I've seen in my time in all of those regions you mentioned is that South Africa just simply has I think it's linked to the general mentality that they're brought up with, and that ability to go, okay, let's call out a problem, because it's best we solve it now and make a plan and worry about it overnight, kind of thing. And that's what I've seen personally. But, as I said, the test is really, when you get it going and how it's received as well. If I give you a real live example, when you have different management teams on the other side, and those that are open to hearing feedback versus closed, you obviously, are going to breed a level of culture that comes with that. But overall, I think that's a real strength of South Africa.
Thanks, Matt. I'm reading out a question from Derek, which is fantastic again. Are there any examples of Australian companies that have outsourced to South Africa since COVID? And if so, how have you bridged the gap with the inability to travel overseas, the inability for Australian stakeholders and SMEs to travel to South Africa would present some risk? So I'm not sure if you would like to take that, Matt.
Yeah, I can. Look, we haven't as such launched a new client during the pandemic out of Australia. we have absolutely increased and taken on new lines of business during that period for a current client. However, during the pandemic, we did launch probably arguably one of the world's largest companies out of the US, and went live and launched that during the pandemic, of which obviously we had to do completely remotely. This particular company has a very large presence in the Philippines, India and others, and so this was the first ever virtual launch they've done, which ultimately ended in being, you know, a raging success, which is fantastic obviously for us, but you know, without doubt it was a unique experience. However, how do we deal with it? You know, we have a lot of tools that we adopted from a virtual perspective. The cadence was very important, you know, making sure that we had that transparency level which matched them being on site, which would normally happen during a launch. You know, I can quote you different methods, things like, for instance, having, you know, the robots that are available to wander the floor and that the client can control to make sure that they feel as if they're on ground and have a presence and they can see everything going on there. You know, to obviously video calling, team meetings, training, you know, sessions multiple times a day. You know, there was just a whole rigor put around that. And I think key to it all was simply the transparency. And that was the biggest thing, making sure that they had access and visibility to what they wanted when they wanted it, provided that level of comfort. And look, as I said, you know, as a result, we were able to launch several hundred during that period very successfully, and are now operating, you know,
Okay.
with great results. So
Thanks, Matt. We're going to have time for just one more question. Would anybody like to ask it? If not, there's another one waiting in the chat room. No? Okay, so the question was around, does anyone have experience transitioning from the Philippines, or I guess any other country, into South Africa from a training perspective? What challenges did that present, and what was done to manage the perceived job threat by the Manila team and get their cooperation? Have you ever had that experience, Matt, being in the Philippines as well as South Africa?
we have. So obviously INET was acquired by TPG. Those of you who are with either provider would know that they have a very large Manila presence, and towards the end of my tenure there, we also had quite a large Manila presence. But prior to that, when I first took over the INET business, we actually did have a team of about 200 in Manila that we actually moved out and into South Africa, and I guess that was a live example. Look, in terms of the training and how you manage that, look, and I don't want to pass the question off, but every situation is very different. But what I can say, and what you do need to do is, for us, it's very much a combined plan. Understanding things like, what is the dual kind of cutover period? Is that function already available there? What is the plan for those staff? And so for us, as well as providing a level of opportunity where possible for those in the Philippines to take on some extra responsibility in terms of becoming those subject matter experts and obviously really playing a key role in adding to the business value. In terms of the job security piece, look, I've seen it, obviously in Australia going to the Philippines, Australia going to India, Australia going to South Africa. It does come down to what the actual plans in place are. The one thing in the Philippines is obviously, the attrition levels there certainly allow for an element of planning. The support levels, depending on what you are as a business and who your partners are there, in terms of how they look after, the placement of staff and, all the associated support programs that come with that are no different to what we would do in Australia, for instance. So there's so many factors to that that I'm more than happy to talk through my actual scenarios. Maybe, when we have a bit more time, or if you want to reach out through Sharon to me directly, I'm more than happy to share the war stories and the scars with that, and try and give some advice if you are going through that, not just to South Africa, but to any region, because it is very much a situational basis. But there are models that we do use which are very high on, a lot of joint planning and joint execution that come with that.
Thanks, Matt. I'll link you up offline later with Lee. So it's now the end of the Q&A, and I have the pleasure of asking Andy to announce the winner of the bottle of champagne for Best Audience Question.
That's a really tough call, Sharon, because the questions and the chat and the voice question have all been just fantastic. But I think the award needs to go to Albina for the 2 questions, around the digital capability comparison, and also I think just unearthing those key attributes of the South African value proposition, that solution accountability, problem-solving nature of South Africans. And so the award goes to you. Congratulations, Albina.
Thanks, Andy.
Enjoy.
Thank you, Andy and Albina. I will definitely arrange to deliver your bubbles offline. So that brings our event to a close. I hope you enjoyed it. Really, we were all thrilled with the level of engagement and number of questions. So to everyone who attended, and to Karthik over in India, thank you so much. This is the end of our South African mini-series. As I mentioned, we'll be sending around a short survey to get your thoughts. And the BPESA team remain available to engage further, and I'll share their contact details on the survey. Wishing everyone a wonderful day ahead. Stay safe, stay well, and thanks again.
Thank you, Sharon. That was great.
Thanks a lot, Sharon.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.